my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great.
Hello, BYWG Podcast Tribe. This is Dr. Noah. For the month of September, we have an incredible book of the month and product of the month, or should I say products of the month, to share with you all. As a reminder, all the links for the book and product of the month will be listed in the show notes in iTunes, in our weekly newsletter, and on our website at www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com at the Listen Now tab. Our book of the month is Ketotarian, the mostly plant-based plan to burn fat, boost your energy, crush your cravings, and calm inflammation, by Dr. Will Cole. Dr. Cole has been on the podcast twice, and you can find his interviews at www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com in the archives at the Listen Now tab. The product of the month is the entire line of Primal Kitchen condiments, foods, and nutritional products. All Primal Kitchen ingredients are selected according to the strictest standards of taste, natural healthfulness, and phytonutrient potency. Some of my personal favorites are the chipotle mayonnaise and the lemon turmeric salad dressing. Enjoy free shipping on all orders of $50 or more and 10% off your order using our special code for our audience, BYWG. Enjoy the upcoming podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. My name is Dr. Noah DeCoyer and I'm your co-host. Today I'm very excited to invite Tiffany Turner on the podcast. Personally, I've enjoyed Tiffany's rise to fame, watching her through social media, speak at all these different conferences, and I love her Instagram, Beyond 20 Questions, and I sent whatever that's called on Instagram to have her on. She responded, and so here she is. You could tell my age. And here she is. Tiffany, I'm going to do your bio, and then we're going to get started, okay?
Okay.
And today's topic is going to be social connection in depression. So Tiffany Turner is a graduate of Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine and is part of the team at Integrative Health in Scottsdale, Arizona. Her research career began with comparative genomics using software modeling to annotate genomes of very small creatures with names impossibly to pronounce correctly. For the last 4 years, she has been part of a research team that focuses on the prevention, control, and treatment of multi-drug resistant bacteria and viruses using botanicals. Sounds like our mutual friend, Dr. Ruiz, correct?
Yep, sure does.
Her work has been published in several peer-reviewed journals. In spare time, she tortures bacteria, is curious about anything that will fit under a microscope, and gets embarrassingly excited when lab supplies arrive in the mail. Her love of botanical medicine and curiosity about infectious diseases has sparked a passion for sharing her research with others. She has presented nationally at integrative conferences, including the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine Symposium, the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians Annual Convention, the Southwest Conference on Botanical Medicine, and the Ancestral Health Symposium. Correct me if I'm wrong, you just spoke there a few weeks ago, right? Or a few weeks ago?
I did. I had back-to-back conferences in July.
Nice. And as well as internationally at the International Congress on Naturopathic Medicine. She has a clinical focus in endocrinology and has a passion for promoting mental health. So first things first, is there anything else you need to flesh out on your bio that our audience needs to know about you, Tiffany?
No, I think that's a lot of details already. My interest in medicine, I use the analogy of you can always see the stars in the sky, but it takes a while before you notice the constellations. So all my life I was very curious about a lot of concepts of medicine, uses of historical medicines like botanical medicine, and then just recently, here, it kind of all came together, and I was like, this is really where my passion lies. This is really what I want to do. So that's how I ended up here.
Sounds good. And why naturopathic medicine as opposed to a slightly more traditional approach?
I considered a lot of options. There were different cases I'd seen where I was like, the conventional approach, I respect it, and there's a lot of places where it does a lot of good, but in some cases there's something missing, and so I was trying to figure out where to go from there. Research I wanted to go into, or the naturopathic medicine I wanted to go into. So I ended up going into naturopathic medicine because it allowed me to have a little bit of focus on research. I had so many great opportunities here at SCNM as far as research goes. but also it allowed me to explore some of these alternative modalities like nutrition and lifestyle and botanical medicine that I was really curious to learn more about.
I totally understand that. So let's get right down into the meat of the topic today. This was one of your passions. So I want you to define two things in the way you would define them. Number one, depression, and number two, social connection.
Yeah, so depression, there's different categories of depression, but depression is really a loss of interest in things that should interest you. It's a very low mood. Sometimes there's suicidal ideation. There's different categories. There's major depressive disorder, which is quite severe. There's dysthymia, which is the long-term grade depression. And then there's different types of, you can combine that in things like manic depression, where you have periods of high mood, periods of low mood. And then this social connection piece is very important because we have this loneliness and social isolation being a chronic stress, and those are tied into or associated with depression as well. And when we look at depressive symptoms, there's this very interesting pattern that emerges, and we see that when you have depression in a social context, such as the loss of social status or the loss of a person as kind of a triggering event, rather than a non-social context, like the loss of an important life goal, you see different sets of symptoms. So in the context of a social loss, you have crying and sadness and desire for social support. Whereas in the non-social context, you'll have some of those symptoms like guilt and rumination and fatigue and pessimism. So that was very curious to me that there was such a distinction in those two different patterns, and just the impact that social connection or lack of social connection has. We can also further define loneliness and social isolation, because sometimes those are used interchangeably, but they're quite different. So social isolation is more of an objective state. So it's like I'm in my house and there's no one around me. There's no one else in the house. Right now I am isolated in my house. Then there's loneliness, which is the subjective state. So I can be alone but not feel lonely. Or I can be in a crowded room and still feel lonely, because that's how I perceive to be in myself.
So I have just a few thoughts and comments. I never thought too much about social interaction. I'm a pretty social person. I have a little bit of an interest in the blue in the blue zones, and also, and we know through those blue zones, all these people had huge social groups, and they just lived longer, right? So that says something for being very social and having social connection. And then, my friend, and I've interviewed him several times and spoke at his events, James Maskell, he talked about sociogenomics, and it's the same kind of thing. Are we talking about the same kind of thing here, where social connection has some serious interplays on your health, depression, non-depression, etc.?
Yeah, it's so important, and I think it gets not necessarily undervalued in the clinic, but we don't support it best, I would say, from a clinical standpoint. We get these patients with certain problems in the clinic, and sometimes you have these patients coming in, and they're maybe coming in more often than they really need to, or maybe they're coming in and they're just not really getting better. And you realize that, if they're coming in more often than they need to, maybe they're just lonely. That's their main event. That's you're their social life. And even over time, there's been interesting studies on that, where they've taken a survey of people and they've said, okay, how many people do you have you can discuss really important topics with? And in 1985, the most common response was 3 people. And in 2004, the most common response was 0 people. And so that really kind of spoke to me. I was like, wow, these people that we talk to on a daily basis in the clinic, these patients, probably a lot of them, you're the main person they're telling these things to, and that's really important to stop and consider, because that has such an important impact on both their physical and their psychological health.
You can't help to think, like, we're becoming more connected via social media and less connected in real, true, honest connection. And I guess that's the real problem.
Yeah, it could go either way. You think about it, and we have all this technology that would really allow us to expand on fluid social networks that we've seen, in the past, or with contemporary hunter-gatherer groups, where, they have these social networks and they have all these resources and information exchange, and they move from place to place. Well, in our modern world, we have planes, we have cars, we have phones, we have all these things that allow us to instantly connect with other people, whether it's going there physically or connecting virtually, all these resources, and yet at the same time, we can use that technology to hide. I can order groceries to my door. I can order pretty much anything I want through Amazon Prime and have it delivered, tonight or tomorrow. And if I didn't want to, I could really just not go anywhere and not interact in real life or real time with someone.
Yeah, I think you mentioned hunter-gatherers. I think of hunter-gatherers, ancestral people, sitting around a fire at the end of the evening, just telling stories, passing down stories, teaching the youngsters how to survive in this crazy world. And and they didn't have to wear blue blocking lenses because they had the fire and they had the starlight, and the bonds they created were real, deep, and really it was for their life and their survival. Now, like you said,
yep.
we can use our phone and connect to anybody in these non-real conversations that really have very little. You may think they have a strong bearing or very important, but they're so unimportant, and they don't certainly have non-life important meanings for sure.
Yeah, and I remember as a kid, you mentioned sitting around the fire and sharing stories, and I remember as a kid trying to interview some of my older relatives about some of these stories that they might have, and being very curious about different aspects of, say, their childhood and things like that. And then as I get older and those relatives aren't there anymore, I'm like, I'm glad I have these stories. And I think that's something that we lose a little bit as we, older people end up in assisted living or things like that, and not always in this kind of multi-generational living situation. Although in recent years, multi-generational living has increased, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I agree. So are there a particular population that is at risk for what we're talking about today, or is it becoming across the board now?
I think that there's probably different risk factors you could pull out for a lot of groups. There are some that stood out from the research in the published literature. That's adolescents, when they're at that intersection of physical, emotional, and social change. And then you have this increased risk of suicide if their friends are suicide attempters. But you also have a protective effect if they have really dense networks at school. So there's both, the potential harm from social connections, and there's a potential protection from social connection there. There's also, sexual minorities. They face a lot of discrimination, and suicidal ideation rates are as high as 45%. We also have young adults moving away for college, and they're facing new social environments, new levels of social and academic pressure, which can be huge, as well as poor sleep. And then postpartum depression, we often think of hormones, but there's also a ton of social factors going on there in terms of support for a new mother, the effects on her career, new social roles and expectations. And then society also has this guilt thing with mothers putting their kids in daycare so they can resume their careers. And all those have a huge impact on the development of postpartum depression as well.
How about the elderly?
Yes, definitely. That's another huge one. There's a lot of loneliness and social isolation in that group. And that's why this multi-generational living being on the rise is really promising to me, because that a lot of that is with elderly moving back in with their adult children or vice versa, and sharing responsibilities, giving a lot more, like the parents can provide some, I should refer that. So like the kids can provide their parents with a lot of support for their health needs, and the grandparents can then provide childcare for the kids of their kids. So there's a lot of mutual support there that is protective.
Yeah, that's I looked at multi-generational living as a negative up until just a minute ago. Like, when I've been out of the house since I was like 18, literally, I'm 43, I haven't come back.
Yeah, and society places huge pressure on that independence. Like, you need to be independent. You need to get out of the house.
Yeah, yes, and I see it in a little different light now, where it may not be so bad for the kids moving back in at home, or for the mother or father moving back in, because I can tell you this, as being a father of two, and a lot of parents working now, the grandparents play a bigger role than ever. The grandparents are the ones picking up the kids from school, bringing them to the sporting events. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, daycare is expensive.
Yeah.
Assisted living is expensive.
Yes.
Having health issues with your parents is stressful, because, if you're not right there to look after them, you don't know all the time if they're okay. And so this rising multi-generational living, although it's because of negative reasons like finances or an economic downturn, it ends up having a lot of positives. So it has a positive effect on mental health, so it's associated with lower rates of depression, and then all this support that they have for each other. And then there's also these developments that are becoming more common now, where it's, you have this house split into two parts, so the parents can have their own kind of living space from the rest of the family. So you're in the same space, but you also maintain a little bit of privacy. But all you need to do is open the door, and you can check on one group, or like you can check on the parents, or you can check on the little kids. And it really makes things a lot easier while still preserving that sense of having your own space.
Yeah, I could tell you this, as a child, I grew up in a two-family house with my grandparents living above me, and I think at times my parents didn't dig it so much, but it was like the best thing in the world for me. I'd eat breakfast downstairs, run upstairs, eat breakfast again, if I needed to escape.
Yeah.
And my one grandmother's still alive, and she's the matriarch of our family, and she's like the best ever, and she's the wisest one out of the bunch, I'm telling you.
Yeah, as a kid, I always loved anything with my grandparents. I just loved being with my grandparents. I never lived close to any of them until I moved here for school, and that was part of my decision to move to this area specifically, was so that for once in my life I could live close to a set of grandparents, because that was always so special to me, to be able to spend time with them. It was always so much fun.
Yeah, I agree. Now, we talked about it a little bit with social media, but where are the biggest negatives with social media, and where do you see technology and social media being helpful in mental health and depression? Because there's got to be both sides to it, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because there's one study showing this U-shaped curve where there's a decreased risk of depression with 1 hour of use, and then once you got over 2 hours, it was an increasing risk. And I honestly don't know anyone who only uses technology for an hour. But that was very interesting because it's not inherently bad. It's about how we use it. And some of the older studies are maybe more helpful in that respect of kind of determining the benefit and the harm, because they could look at, gaming or text messaging or internet use. And now screen time could be anything. All these devices can do so many things at once. It's hard to control for any one factor. Some of the more problematic uses of technology or of digital media include online gaming, video gaming, computer use. Screen time both predicts depressive symptoms as well as depressive symptoms predicting screen time. So there's a little bit of an effect both ways, it seems. The problem with or pretend a lot of social media use, a lot of technologies is displaced time. So what is that taking away from? Are you on your computer instead of hanging out with your kid? Are you checking your email first thing in the morning instead of taking your dog for a walk? That thing. As opposed to, I used to write paper charts and now I'm doing my charts on the computer, which is not really a detrimental change necessarily. There's concerns, especially in younger populations, about inappropriate or inaccurate content, unsafe contacts, and then just these privacy and confidentiality issues. I thought it was really interesting that you can actually see fear reactions in kids from media exposure. So they get trauma-like symptoms just from something that wasn't even necessarily real. It was something they just saw. And that's concerning because kids are being exposed to this stuff younger and younger.
Like we're talking about depression, mental health, but like with my kids, with this online gaming, it totally drives me crazy. Like Fortnite, is that I see more anger than depression in my children, but I guess it could be, it's different for every child, right?
Yeah, and there's the age of use, there's the way that they process it. A lot of factors really go into that. And then gender as well. Males seem to have different, seems to affect them differently. Like, for example, there's a term, Facebook addiction disorder, which isn't an official DSM diagnosis, but it's studied in the literature, and that's particularly detrimental for males. So there's definitely a lot of factors there. But that whole social ranking and we can see that happening from a super young age, like even in kindergarten. Those social factors are there, and stuff really matters.
So we've outlaid a lot of this stuff surrounding social connection and social media and depression and mental health. How do you round this out? What are your suggestions that people do? How do they get help? How do they recognize they have a problem? What is your action plan or action steps for when you see this in your clinic, or people consult you about this, or you lecture and present at these different associations? What's your action plan? What's your action steps?
Well, face-to-face communication has a lot of positive outcomes that we just don't get otherwise. And when we use social media to stay connected with or maintain face-to-face relationships has a decreased odds of depressive symptoms. So that's beneficial. That's extending a relationship. That's maintaining a relationship. When we have a lot of social media contacts that are strangers that we don't really know, like someone friend requests us and they're like, I feel bad not accepting this, or, they're friends with someone who's friends of a friend of a friend of a friend, and you don't really know them, then that's a little more detrimental. So just being more cautious of whose friend requests you're accepting on Facebook or who you're following on Instagram, and just being aware, is this someone I know in real life? Is this someone I need to follow? That's one thing. There are some positives to online technology. There's support groups that can be helpful. It also removes a lot of barriers for certain populations. You know, it removes barriers based on appearance. It can remove barriers based on social skills. And, you know, if you're not good at those subtle facial expressions, you know, reading them or accepting those subtle cues, then online communication might be more helpful for you and prevent you from, in your life, you might try and reach out and just not be able to make that connection, whereas online, you can stop and you can think about how you want to respond to someone. Whereas in a real-time conversation, you know, you ask me something and I have to respond. I can't stop and think about it and try and tailor my response to be acceptable or make sense, whereas you can do that online. So there's certain ways that can be useful for some people. Another way of just being aware of how your social media use is affecting you is thinking about, is my social media use or is my technology use adding to my people, or is it taking away? Am I sitting here, you know, having dinner with my family but scrolling through Facebook and not really engaging? Or am I using my phone to find a restaurant where I'm going to meet my friends for dinner, which is adding to a real-time experience? So, you know, you really have to think about, is this adding or taking away? And if it's distracting to you, making sure that you don't have alerts for things you don't need. So maybe turning off Facebook alerts, or you putting on alerts for things you do want so that you don't have to passively scroll. So, for example, with Instagram, I have alerts for my family and a few close friends that I really, you know, if they post something, I want to know about it. So I have those alerts set, and then I know that I'm not missing out, because that's one of the biggest things with especially, you know, in the adolescent population, there's fear of missing out. So I have these alerts set. So if someone that I really need to know about posts something, I'll get an alert, and I don't have to, you know, passively scroll through Instagram every single day and see absolutely everything on there and get really distracted, or, you know, see things on there and be like, oh, I'm not as good as that, or, you know, that negative social comparison thing. So really just assessing what you need it for, how you need to use it, and then ways that you can reduce the unnecessary time that you spend on there. So you can spend time doing things like working on your career, hanging out with your kids, hanging out with a pet, you know, just spending time in real life connecting with real people.
And what are there any telltale signs where, you know, you need to see, like, you need to seek some sort of help? Like, what are the major signs where, like, this is beyond a little bit of a bad habit? This is really troublesome or really problematic.
Yeah, it would be similar to other addictions where, you know, if not having that, not being able to check the phone is really distressing, and if you're always checking it, and there's actually a study that examined specifically what patterns of use were problematic. And the most problematic use pattern was you're spending a ton of time on social media, you're checking it all the time, so you're spending also like constantly opening and checking, and oh, I have alert here, I have a like here, I have a comment here, I need to respond here. And then also multiple platforms, so maybe you're switching between Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Pinterest. And then also an emotional investment. So you're really involved. You know, if someone likes something, you're really happy. If someone has a negative comment, that really upsets you, but you have to be on there. You have to be interacting on there. And there's that huge emotional investment where if you don't have access to it, you're just like, it's a disaster. Like, you know, you really need it. That was the most problematic set of patterns that they saw.
That all makes sense. Because some of these things are tough to point out to where if it's a real significant issue, as an issue compared to like a habit. I caught my younger son hiding in his bed with his phone the other day. You know, I'm like, oh, mackerel, you know, like, this is getting to be a little bit more serious than I'd like, Not a depressive thing, but more of just a sheer addiction thing,
Yeah, and it's not that, you don't know where that's going to lead down the road either. You don't know how that's going to affect things down the road. You don't know what that time is displacing. And we really don't have time to waste. We have time to spend. And is this really how we want to spend our time? Because once it's spent, we can't get it back. We don't want to, get to the end of life and be like, I really shouldn't have checked Facebook that many times. I wish I'd spent my time doing this, So that's another thing to consider. And sometimes we don't make those realizations until it's a little bit too late.
Oh, yeah. When kids are on, and I could just see this with my own kids, but anybody, when they're on these video games, and even my adult patients that do gaming, they'll stay up all night, go to bed at literally 3 o'clock in the morning, wake up at 6, have horrible posture, come in with, neck, shoulder, migraine headaches, and it's like pulling teeth trying to figure out what's going on with them. And I would imagine in some of them, it's, their lack of sleep for long enough, and maybe they're not playing it's going to translate into not just poor sleep, but like depression and mental and other things that we've discussed today. So yeah, you don't know where that's going to lead. Because again, I could tell my kids, if I put a timer on for 30 minutes, and it goes off, and they're like, "What? I was playing for 2 minutes." It's like there's something very peculiar. Yeah, it's hard. It's but there are very many positives too. I would not replace my phone and technology. You just have to learn how to use it better and more efficiently. Totally agree.
Yep, definitely. And there's so many cool new things that we can do because of technology, and it really does allow us to expand our social networks as well. One interesting, I've unexpectedly expanded my social networks is through just ride-sharing apps. I'm using my phone to get a ride somewhere, and you have this 10 to 20 minute interval with a complete stranger, and you learn all sorts of really interesting things. You learn new, I learned about a new plant the other day, or you learn about someone who can help you do something that you've been trying to do. So just as far as problem solving and establishing more connections, and just even hearing the stories of all these people is very interesting.
It is. I absolutely couldn't agree more. Now, a few last questions. One, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way to do that would just be through the contact form on my website, beyond20questions.com.
Okay, and you check that?
Or Instagram.
Yeah.
Like you did.
Yes, I would definitely suggest Instagram. And my last question that I've asked, the last 50 or 60 interviews is, and I found that people really like this question and they get a lot out of it. What is your daily, rhythm and routines, from sleeping to wake? Just curious.
Oh boy, that's a tough one because I feel like everything is always changing. So I had back-to-back conferences and then board exams. So my schedule was a little bit all over the place. But lately I've been really focused on getting up early. I like to have, 10 to 15 minutes in the morning allotted to just space out and allow myself to not do anything and just let my brain wake up. And if I get up early enough to do that before, say, I go to the clinic or I start studying, that's a successful day. And then from there, if it's a study day, I'll go for a walk in the sun, and I'll do that in the morning and in the afternoon, just as a nice break, get some sunshine. If it's a clinic day, it's going to be, it's a little bit insane. So I'll go to the clinic, and it'll always be a busy day, and time will fly. And other than that, I really don't have a ton of routine to my day. It's always a little bit different. On weekends, I like to go ice skating. And during the week, if I get super bored, I like to rearrange all my furniture. I do that quite often.
Great answer. Some people don't want to have rhythms. I like rhythms, and I have pretty set rhythms and rituals, and of course that gets changed and altered. But like you, my morning rituals are by far the most important, and then the end of day. You have nothing at the end of the day to help you go to sleep. Nothing along those lines.
Usually I'm so tired, I just fall asleep. I like to keep my place really cool at night. If I don't keep it cold, I won't sleep well, or I'll have nightmares or something. But other than that, that's it.
Sounds great. So do you have any last words for our audience?
I think that's it. My main message here would just be, engage in your social network, outside of your phone, and be cautious of the social network you cultivate on your phone, and really try and engage in your community to create positive change, and just appreciate the connections you have. Take time to thank people when they do something for you. Take time to reach out to the people that mean a lot to you. All those little things really add up, and people really, really appreciate when you take the time to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the one thing that I've noticed through our conversation today, and I hope the audience noticed it, is that you referenced a lot of research articles and things like that, and all the work you do and some of your colleagues that I know are really well researched, well documented, and that just gives so much more validity to what you're speaking about. So I appreciate that greatly.
Thank you.
So my name is Dr. Noah DeCoyer, your co-host, and you are listening to the Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. If you like what you've heard today, please share this with your friends and encourage them to subscribe on iTunes. Thank you, and as my oldest son Hayden says, be awesome and never unawesome.
1, 2, 3, 4, get my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling